for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening. How you doing? How you doing? Fade to Black. Yeah, it's a Friday night special tonight. It is Friday, July 17th, 2026. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. All right. Let's do this, man. Yeah. This week on Fade to Black. Great week. Monday night, Tim Tactical was here. NHI on Earth. Tuesday night, Melissa Tittle was here with her new film, Illusion. Wednesday night, we were supposed to have this guy, Jason Quitt, on. Couldn't do it. Yeah, man. Root canal emergency that didn't wrap up until today, by the way. But I'm good. I'm here. Last night, Larry Eisler III was here, paranormal filmmaker. Great conversation last night on the show. But tonight, it's Jason Quitt. Yeah, I had to cancel on Wednesday. And, Jason being, one of my close friends, and having to cancel on him really bummed me out. But I said, hey, man, he said, no, it's okay, man. Just, whenever. I said, no. We're going to do a show on Friday. And he kept checking in on me. Are you okay? Dude, I'm fine. We're going to do the show. So that's what we're doing. It's Friday nights, and it's Fade to Black. And we're going to talk about Jason's new book, The Shining Island. I've titled the show Plato's Atlantis, right, with a question. We're going to dive into this tonight. And I've said it a lot about Jason over the years. It's a very consistent, repeatable statement that I make. His mind works differently than ours. It just does. And we need more people like Jason out there that just thinks a little bit differently. Don't conform. Just follow your thoughts and then go and dive into it. And he has always approached these things that he writes about and investigates with that curiosity. And when he came at me, I don't know. I guess we can ask Jason. He's waiting in the background. Well, you know what? I'll just bring him in so you can watch his face. So, hey, Jason. So here's the thing. So I don't know how many books now that we've been involved with together. Is it 2, 3, maybe? Is it 3? Is the count 3?
Yeah, the count is 3, I believe.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm thinking 3 too.
Yeah.
You and I know nothing about the facts about us.
No, we just go.
We don't know anything. We don't know anything. Is it? I don't know. I don't know either. How did we meet, Jason? I don't know. I don't know how we met. Do you remember how we met? No. So we know nothing about each other. As close as we are. So anyway, Jason is constantly calling me up, going, "Okay, dude. I got it. I got the new book. I'm right. Okay. So what's it about? Well, it's about what? Huh?" And then it just evolves from there. And it's always been a lot of fun to go through this. And here we go with another round with this new book about Atlantis. And when this started to evolve, and I'm going to write the foreword to the book, and I'm reading the book and going through it, I thought that I was pretty solid. This is still the introduction, Jason. You're not part of the show yet. We haven't commenced. We haven't commenced. Where I thought I had Atlantis pretty dialed in. I didn't know where it was or anything like that. But my thoughts and my research into Atlantis, I felt pretty confident about. And that goes back to Egypt with the Ed Fu Builder's text, and William Henry's work on this too as well, and others. And then, of course, the work of Plato. And I okay, all right. And then Jason comes along and just throws a wrench in everything. Now, Jason, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Did you, before we dive into the book, did you consider the arguments and debates and maybe a little bit of backlash that was going to result from this book, where people were just like me, where they had finally kind of got a solid grip on Atlantis and had their own views on Atlantis, and then a book like yours, as you're considering writing it, this is going to tip everything over, man. Were you considering what potentially was going to come at you?
Yeah. I knew right away that this is a very touchy subject, but this is kind of the community that we're in. And I think every book that I've written so far is a very touchy subject. So that's kind of the kind of corner I've placed myself in. So if I don't, stay in that corner and have my own lane, it's that I'm just copying and repeating what other people are saying, which, I really don't want to do. I want to have a unique voice in this community. So I kind of knew where I was going with it. And it actually, it started with Beyond Belief, if you could believe that.
Yeah, that was a good show too, by the way.
We were talking on your show, Beyond Belief with Gaia, great show. We were discussing, we did an episode about the gods and the stars, and the producers, they say, okay, Jay, send us some slides or pictures that you'd like us to throw up on the screen and we could discuss it on the show. And I wanted to kind of show that in ancient texts, they refer to the gods as the stars. It wasn't like an allegory or things like that. They literally said these gods were these stars, not like they came from the stars, but they were the actual stars burning in heaven. And I
not that there's anything wrong with that.
No. It was an old theology, an old philosophy, and even Plato himself conformed to that idea as well, which we'll get into. But I threw up on the screen a picture of the northern sky, the northern heavens. And I put a date next to the constellation Hercules. And I said, did you know, Jimmy, that approximately 9,600 BCE, right at the end of the Younger Dryas period, where there's massive floods on Earth and all these catastrophes. And do you know that there is no North Pole, and it's drifted right in between the pillars of Hercules in the northern sky? So it's drifted right into the constellation Hercules. And I said, doesn't that kind of connect to Plato's story of that Atlantis was outside the pillars of Hercules and the destruction happened at 9,600 BCE? Is that a coincidence that it lines up chronologically to the precession of the North Star in the northern sky? And I put that on the show on your Beyond Belief, but I didn't say anything else. I kind of just dropped this thing with no sources, no anything, just kind of like a wink of some deeper information. And then when I got home, I kind of got this feeling where it's like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
How can I go on Jimmy's show and say something this stupid, without explaining the background understanding of this? So I started to kind of research it a little more, and I said, you know what? I have to go back and I have to read Plato's own words. I have to read the Timaeus. And for people that don't know, the source of Atlantis, and yes, you can go back to different temple traditions in Egypt, but the source of the Atlantis story itself comes from two books or two dialogues that Plato wrote at the end of his life, around 360 BCE. And the first book was called the Timaeus, which is the the dialogue of Timaeus, who is like the greatest philosopher astronomer at that time, and then the Critias. And Critias, again, it's a dialogue. Now, the Timaeus is the only complete book that has the Atlantis narrative in it. And then he started writing the Critias, which kind of ends, I don't even want to say in the middle of it because it's very short. It probably ends like 20% into the Atlantis story. So all the information that we have about Atlantis comes from the Timaeus, where Critias introduces Atlantis at the beginning of the Timaeus's talk. This is in front of Socrates and Hermocrates. And then the Critias, then he gets into the story of Atlantis, where he kind of goes over, you know, how Atlantis was formed, the gods, the structure, you know, the technology, the people over time becoming warlike and then going to fight. And then it ends like right in the middle of a very important scene where Zeus basically gathers the gods to discuss what they're going to do about these people of Atlantis. What are they going to do about them? And right in the middle of that speech, mid-sentence cuts off. So we don't have a complete story of Atlantis because it cuts off maybe 20% into that story. And then there was supposed to be a third book, Hermocrates. And Hermocrates was going to end this whole thing. And it's interesting, the name itself, Hermocrates, means the power of Hermes. So already you're getting this kind of like mystic, hermetic thing, this missing puzzle. And people are saying, you know, well, did Plato not finish this work purposefully? Did he just release it not finished? Like, these books were studied in his school. Like, he released them this way. And I don't think Plato did that willy-nilly. You know what I mean? There was a purpose to why he did it this way. So I went back, I started to read the Timaeus. And remember, Timaeus is a person. And it's his dialogue, and he's talking about the creation of the universe, the creation of the world, the creation of humanity. He's talking about how there's a positive demiurge who basically created everything. And then he discusses exactly the order in which it's kind of like a Genesis story of creation. Very deep, metaphysical, cosmological, astronomical, metaphysical, talks about platonic solids, talks about all these very interesting topics. And right at the beginning of this talk, you have Critias, who introduces Atlantis. And then right after he introduces Atlantis, Socrates says, okay, don't say any more, Critias. Let Timaeus talk. And you get this huge story from Timaeus. It's a big body of work. And then the next book, Critias, he just jumps right into the Atlantis story, kind of like the nitty-gritty stuff, like how Atlantis is built, the people, the animals, the fruit, the farming, how they build bridges, the temples, you know, all these things about Atlantis. And then it cuts off very short.
Yeah. So the way that you are approaching this, not only in the book, but on this show, is, let me get direct so everybody understands. So this is a very direct question. Do you feel that Plato, in his presentation of Atlantis, was writing a fable, a fable with lessons to be learned for his students, so they could go and then have that mindset and move on with their lives with this fable? Is that what you're saying?
Well, this is basically the consensus. And
what? No, I don't want you to dance.
Okay.
It's yes or no.
Yes. If from Plato's perspective, It is called a likely story. He's a master at it.
Yep.
And if you follow Plato and his works, this is what he's famous for. He's literally famous for creating these type of stories and putting a lot of hidden things within this, be it philosophical, be it cosmological, be it about the building of the state, society, justice, all these incredibly deep topics that were going on back then. He kind of placed them in these type of stories. Like we all know the famous story of the cave, where they have these people and they're seeing the shadows on the wall and they leave, but there's all these likely stories, and he's a master at it. Now, when I'm reading this, remember what my background is. I just came off of 2 books that delve deeply into ancient mysticism, ancient mythology, ancient gods. And in those 2 books, Astral Genesis and Gates of the Anunnaki, what we were doing in those books is we were looking at these very ancient motifs that continually play throughout these theological motifs or theological works. So we went back to, let's say, like the Anunnaki, or we went back to Babylon, or we went to Egypt, and we're looking at all these creation myths. And that's what the last 2 books were. So then I go into Plato, and I wasn't expecting this, but it's the same thing with like the Bible, where they say like, you read the Bible today and then read it in 5 years, it's going to be completely different to your eyes. Because as you have different experiences, the words are going to change to your experience. And that's what happened to me with Plato. So I'm reading Plato's description, or Timaeus's or Critias's descriptions, and how the story is built. And I just slap myself in the forehead, because this is what I've been writing about for the past 2 books. It's like Plato knew these motifs, he knew these themes, and he knew how to like intertwine them into the work of Atlantis. And he did such a good job that we're still talking about Atlantis today, because it offers that great story of a lost civilization, high technology. And, I just want to separate things, because we're just talking very specifically Plato. All right. There is a whole other side to the Atlantis story that comes actually recently, just over the past like 100+ years. And that came from Edgar Cayce. So Edgar Cayce did a lot of past life regression, where he wrote a lot about past lives in Atlantis. So that has its own category. And then you have the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, which was also channeled work that came out from a channeler named Dorian, I believe. So you have these works that have come out in the past 100 years that kind of changed the story of Atlantis. But before that, we just had Plato's Atlantis. So we have to kind of separate the different Atlantises, to get to the bottom of it.
So are you asking the reader to contemplate an alternate view on Atlantis? And do you now lean on that view that you write about, or are you just asking people to consider something else, but you still consider Atlantis a real place and an actual island and an ancient civilization?
I think there was definitely an ancient civilization. There's no doubt in my mind that there wasn't. I don't want to say it was Atlantis, but there was ancient peoples that did have high technology. And when I say high technology, I'm not talking about spaceships. I'm not talking about computers and things like that. I'm talking about high technology as in agriculture. They know how to build. They built up the land. They created water systems. They had temple building. You know, they could travel in their boats. Like in the Atlantis story, their high technology was they were a naval power, so they can travel the water. So back then, that was high intelligence, high technology. You know, so when you start getting into the stuff that's been released in the past 100 years, that's when you start getting into all this kind of fantastical versions of Atlantis with flying saucers or crystal technology or things like that. Whereas none of that is in the original Plato works.
Now, what about, okay, I think you're being politically correct. You're playing the safe zone here, but that's fine because it's a controversial book and it's a book that I've thoroughly enjoyed. But the title is also suggestive too as well. Where did that come from? The Shining Island. Because even the title implies a couple of different things. Is it an island that is shining, or is it a mirage on the horizon that isn't real? Right? It's so what's the title mean?
Well, the title the title itself is an as above, so below type of hermetic principle, where if you take the time scale, and I can show you the maps of this, if you take the time scale of the destruction of Atlantis, which happens in the northern sky between the legs of Hercules, or the pillars of Hercules, if you turn that clock backwards a couple thousand years to when Atlantis would have been at its height, when everything was in harmony and perfect, you have Vega, the brightest northern star in the sky, was the North Star. It's 6 times brighter than Polaris, so it's the brightest star that ancient people would see in the night sky. It would be the most important star, and all the heavens would revolve around this star in perfect harmony. So it's kind of like saying the Shining Island is this star in the night sky where all the stars revolve perfectly around it, creating this kind of shining island in the sky. So it's this kind of as above, so below motif, saying, you know, Atlantis is the physical image of Vega as the North Star in the sky.
Do you guys got good weed in Canada? That's, jeez, man. That's it. Okay, so let's go to the next phase of this, because going into, before you reread Plato's Atlantis, and if you and I had a conversation about Atlantis before all of this and these revelations that you had about it, I think we would have been talking about a physical place and the destruction, and the leaders and the thinkers and the teachers left the island and went out and taught different cultures around the world and took their knowledge, you know, different cultures around the world, which is in a lot of historical, I almost want to say pop culture, you know, the way that they describe their origin stories. And it seems to always, that would have been the conversation. Mm-hmm. But now it is not the conversation for you, right? So when you have this tipping point where you start to see all of this stuff light up, what was the specific thing that started to lead you down this metaphor fable approach to Atlantis?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that is that's actually true, that there was people that went around to, after a cataclysm or after floods, to, you know, reteach and regrow and restart societies. And I think that if there was a population back then, they would have relied heavily on the stars to navigate the earth. And it would have been around 11,000, 12,000 BCE, where Vega was the North Star, that means they could travel the ocean, they could travel the waters at night, they can travel the earth. So that would be a huge thing for our ancestors. Like that's where they kind of learned how to travel, is through those stars. So when you get to Hercules a couple thousand years later, where there's no where the star starts to move away, you lose navigation, you lose knowledge, you lose this understanding, which would be very important to be kept. Now, where I got this idea from was actually right from the Timaeus, and it's right from the priest's words when he starts. Okay, so you have Solon. Okay, so the whole story of Atlantis from Plato revolves around this character Solon, who's a real person. He is basically a statesman, a poet, a very educated person. He writes laws, and he travels to Egypt around 560 BCE. And during this famous trip, he supposedly meets an Egyptian priest who tells him the Atlantis story. Now, the place he goes to, it's called the Temple of Neith at Sais. Now, I'll slow down right now because this is also very important. You know, who is Neith? Okay. Neith is the goddess, very ancient goddess from Egypt. She's known as the weaver of fates and the cosmos. And she's one of the oldest goddesses. And in fact, in her later stories, she basically turns the dark waters, which is the god Nun, she turns the dark waters to raise the Ben Mound, which is the first stable ground of creation. All right, so this is very important for everyone to understand that. So Solon goes to the Temple of Neith, who is the weaver of the cosmos, so the weaver of the fates, and she is the reason that creation exists. She basically turns the Sea of Nun and raises the Ben stone. Okay, so that's number one. And
let me jump in for everybody listening right now. The Ben stone is something that most people don't know, and if they have heard of it, they don't understand. Number one. Number two, it is very central to all of Egypt, ancient Egypt, all the way through. A Ben stone. Now, Egyptologists don't even agree on what a Ben stone was and what it was used for, what were the first uses, what was the first one, and so forth. But a Ben stone in its basic form is a miniature pyramid, almost like a capstone.
Correct.
And so, and most of them, and there are some that have survived, are also engraved and inscribed. Okay, there's that. But the Ben stone originated on the ground. Okay, and then temples arose out of that. The Ben stone was raised up. There's other, and then possibly that's the ideas behind the obelisk, the pyramid shape, the pyramid construction, and all of that, all evolved out of the Ben stone. We don't know what the first one was. We don't know the story behind it. And again, as central as it is to Egypt and the history of Egypt, its true meaning and what its purpose was has been lost in time. Okay? All right. Did I accurately describe that? Do I sound like I fucking know what I'm fucking talking about?
You do know
it's
what
crazy.
You're talking about. Yes.
But the Ben stone, when you jump into that and you listen to different Egyptologists and different writings and different books and you follow up on it, you'll see that everybody's got their own take on it. There isn't like one central decision of what a Ben stone was, what its purpose was, its origin story. We just don't know. But remember, it's the shape of a pyramid and apparently started out on the ground and eventually it was made into temples and maybe even the obelisk and then the pyramids themselves. Okay.
Yeah. So the story of the Benben is central to Egyptian theology. It is the first mound of creation in which everything comes from. And, to set the scene, you have the abyss, which is dark waters. Think of it like the ocean or space. And then suddenly you have the turning waters, and this Benben mound rises. So you have this central island, okay, this Benben that rises out of the waters. The next thing is the separation from none of Atum or Atum Ra or Ra, where they become conscious. They separate from the waters. They are the light. They settle. Their rays of light settle on the first mound, and this is where he births creation. He gives birth to the first twins, which is Shu and Tefnut, which is moisture and air. And from that, you get the creation of the gods. So this is the central story, and the earliest version of it is actually found in the pyramid texts, which goes to 2600 BCE. So roughly about 46,000 years, sorry, not 46, 4,600 years ago. So it's one of the oldest stories, and it continues throughout Egypt. So the reason I'm telling you this story is central. This is a central key story to the Atlantis story that Plato then writes. So it's very important that, Solon receives the message of Atlantis from the priest of the temple of Neith and Seas, the weaver of the cosmos, the turning. She's the weaver. She's the turning of the cosmos. It's like her net is the Milky Way galaxy. Like, this is some astrotheology stuff. All right. So when you get to reading from the Timaeus, and you start getting the narrative where Critias, he gets this story from his great-grandfather, and it comes to him from Solon. First of all, Critias receives the story when he's like 10 years old. Or he receives it from his grandfather at a festival where they're singing poems of Solon. So they're singing poems, and he hears the story from his grandfather, which is passed down from Solon. And then later in life, he's now transmitting that story in this dialogue. Now, I'm going to pull up this quote because you'll have to kind of see it. All right. Let me see if I can do this for you and your audience here.
If you pull it up, I might be able to take it from there. So,
okay, let's say allowed to share screen. Oh, no.
There it is. I got it.
Okay, but that's my screen.
Oh, no,
I don't want
that's
that.
you.
Yeah. Let me try to do this again. See, this is the whole great thing of live shows, right?
Yeah, man.
Slides and PDFs. Never mind. I'm not.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll just read it out loud.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is from so Solon is now in the temple of Neith. He's speaking to the Egyptian priest, and this is what this is how the Egyptian priest introduces the Atlantis story. Okay, so before he says the Atlantis story, he has to tell Solon something very important. He said, "For what is also told in your parts, that once Phaeton, son of Helios, yoked his father's chariot, and through his not being able to drive it along his father's path, burned up what was on the earth, and himself perished when he was struck by a thunderbolt." Okay, so before he starts telling the story of Atlantis, he says, "I want you to know the story of Phaeton." Do you remember the story of Phaeton, where Phaeton steals his father's chariot, the sun gods? He didn't know how to drive it. He crashes it to the earth, and he basically destroys Earth by fire because he didn't know how to fly the solar chariot. And then the Egyptian priest says, this has the figure of a story, but its truth is a shifting of the bodies that move around the earth and along the heavens. Okay, so he basically tells Solon, he goes, what you know as a mythology, what you know as a fable, is actually the movements of the bodies of heaven, of the movements of the stars and the planets in the heavens, and that over great intervals of time, we are met with cycles of great destruction by fire or water over long stretches of time. All right, so this is like the key that the Egyptian priest tells Solon. And I'm just gonna, there's many translations. So here's one more translation that says this. And he says, there have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth. All right, which occurs and reoccurs after long intervals. Okay, so you see how important this setup is?
Yep.
So he tells Solon, I'm going to tell you a myth. All right, just like the myth of Phaeton, where the earth is destroyed by fire, I'm going to tell you another story, but the truth of that story is the moving bodies of the heavens. Okay? This is what the priest says right before he says the Atlantis story. And then he says the Atlantis story, which follows the exact same narrative as basically a cataclysm where the earth or Atlantis and the Athenians get an earthquake. They get taken into the earth. Then you get the Atlanteans. They get there's an earthquake. They go under the water. All right. So it's destruction by water and earthquakes. So he basically tells the exact same story, but different, but the same thing. He says the whole point of this story and the truth of this story is it has to do with cycles of time of the stars. All right. So I take this and I go, oh my God, like my last two books are all about this. It's all about the cycles of the stars. It's all about how the gods are the stars and how they took this kind of astrotheology and they mapped the stars using mythology. And Plato opens up his whole book basically describing that point. So already I know that it's this kind of hermetic mythical text that conceals an astrological and cosmological blueprint. All right. And, you know, some people will say to me, you know, why didn't Plato just come out and say this? Why didn't he just write about the stars? Why didn't he just write about these things? And he did. He wrote it in the Timaeus, where you get the story of Atlantis.
Right.
And, but also you have to remember Socrates, which is Plato's teacher. And Socrates was basically murdered by the state for basically teaching this stuff. And Socrates never wrote anything down. So all his teachings were just like dialogues, just like how Plato writes them. He's basically talking and kind of debating people with different ideas. And he never wanted to write things down. But even just that, talking to people, the state says you're corrupting the youth. You're going outside the state-sponsored gods. And you're basically tried for apostasy, I believe the word is.
Yeah, for thinking.
Yes.
And you know, and let that be a general life lesson, right? If you want to survive the world, stay away from philosophy and math. Just, you know what I mean? I mean, how many times over and over again does this become an issue, right? You rub against the establishment with fresh ideas that involve math and the stars and sprinkle in a little philosophy. And next thing you know, you got Roman soldiers kicking down your front door.
Yeah.
Right. So no, I'm being very serious.
Yeah. This is the time that Plato lived in. And this is, I believe, why he started his own school and why he started to write things down and wrote them in the way of the likely story, because, and this is also why I believe this is the start or the expansion of secret societies, is because we can have the story of Atlantis or a writing of Plato, and the general public and everybody can read it and understand it at one level. And then he initiates you and gives you keys for other levels that change the whole story. And you were not supposed to reveal those keys. And they said, okay, well, in secret societies, they say, well, we'll kill you, if you reveal our secrets. Well, back then, if you revealed the secrets, the state was going to kill you. And anybody else teaching this is kind of like the heretics.
No, completely.
So this is why I believe he did this.
So why'd you write the book, man?
Well,
no,
we don't
anyway,
live in that time anymore.
I mean, you know what? You know what I was thinking this morning? You got the title of the book wrong.
Okay.
It should be Quitspiracy, Atlantis.
True.
That's what it should have been. That's what it should have been. We can redo it.
We can redo it. Start
from
scratch.
I've been editor on this thing from the beginning, so let me suggest an edit. But yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah. And we look back at it now because these stories of heresy and going against the establishment, nobody's ever learned their lesson, right? Stop talking about math, behave yourself, right? Okay, or whatever. But no, these stories, this part of our history repeats itself constantly. And Socrates, not an exception. Plato really was dancing on the edge. And so were many others all the way for the next, until current times, but the next 1,000 years, right? And then up through the Renaissance, man, you know what I mean? Spain and it just never stopped. It never stopped. Okay.
Having knowledge was very dangerous.
Having knowledge teaching knowledge is dangerous. Okay, so let's go back again. So to reset where we are at, the concept, because now we get into the ideas of precession and other things and the long calendar. But here, Jason, how do you resolve in your mind? It's one thing to have Vega and things moving, but how was the knowledge base repeating itself enough to understand the movement of the stars and the heavens and the implications of it? Because most people go out and they see the stars, and including Einstein, and he said everything was static, right? There's nothing moving, right? It's a static universe that we live in, but that wasn't the case. How did the ancients understand the movements of the stars and the heavens and the constellations?
Well, we have to go further back than Plato. We have to go to the Babylonian star keepers, like the high priests, who basically watched the heavens for generations, mapping the sky and the movements. So we get a lot of the calendar systems from the Babylonians. And we also have the same thing in Egypt, where they mapped the stars, and especially in the later period in Egypt. And when we talk about Egypt around the time of Plato, about 360 BCE, since the 5th century BCE, they basically, the Greeks were very influenced by the Egyptians. And even in the Timaeus, it talks about that influence. And if you go back to even Herodotus in his writings of Egypt, because he lived there for many years, this is before Plato, he wrote that the Egyptians were mapping the stars and mapping the sun. And he said that their history goes back about 9,000, 11,000 years. And they said they've watched the sun move on the horizon. All right. He wrote that a couple hundred years before Plato. So all these ideas of the precession, or all this ideas of the moving stars, were told by Herodotus, were told by Plato or from Solon to have come from Egyptian priests. So that's where they believe, or that's where they say this knowledge has come from. Now, only a couple hundred years after Plato, around 200, between 200 and 100 BCE, that's when they discovered officially precession. They measured that, they looked at old star charts, and they realized that the stars were a couple degrees off. And when they mapped the stars with those couple degrees off, they realized that the stars in the heavens move 1 degree every 72 years.
That's right.
And it takes 2,160 years to move through an age. And remember, they call these the Platonic ages, named after Plato, because of the information in the Timaeus. The Timaeus is so important when it comes to this cosmology stuff. And that's where you get the Atlantis story. And then you have the whole cycle. It takes from the whole stars to move in their cycle, the fixed stars. That whole cycle takes 25,920 years approximately. And that's where you get the great year. And even in the Timaeus itself, written around 360 BCE, he basically gives the description of this movement, calling it that there's 8 spheres, the spheres of, or the circle of the same, which is the fixed stars, and the circle of the different, which is the planets and the sun revolving around Earth. And they said that when all 8 spheres do their full rotation over a great length of time, that's when the cycle restarts. So he knew about the movements of the fixed stars. He knew about the movements of the planetary spheres. And we actually get, it's actually named after Plato. So we get the Platonic order, from like the Earth, the moon, the sun, Venus, Mercury. Like you get this order from the Timaeus itself. So all these things that we talk about today, it comes from Plato and the Timaeus.
It's so mind-blowing for me to understand and to grasp that the ancients were able to. Now, this was handed down from generations. You're not going out and looking at the night sky, making measurements at 500 BCE. No, it's generational. Right? They're looking at every 72 years if something is moving a degree. Well, somebody, a generation before that, was marking that and prior and prior and prior. I can go outside with my knowledge of the night sky, which is minimal at best, but I understand things, right? And science, and I research this. But I look up at the night sky with all of my gear. You know this, Jason. I don't see nothing. Ain't nothing moving, right? There's nothing there. And that's with I know what's going on, but I don't see it. So how is it that the ancients firmly, the zodiac at Dendara, they know exactly when that was made because of the placement of everything in that zodiac. And it's accurate. Right? And that's not the only zodiac. It's one of the coolest ones. But because of, back to your point, the way that Egypt was mapping the stars in the heavens, that's a way for us to turn around and chronologically timeline ancient Egypt. That's how accurate this stuff was going down. I just don't know how they did it or how they even understood it. That's crazy, unless it was taught. I keep going back to that same point.
Yes, and it blows my mind, but you have to remember that our mind and their mind is very different. Because their mind, you're talking about a civilization or populations of tribes that have come out of a very traumatic time, very traumatic epoch of time, hundreds of thousands of years of trying to survive. And remember, there's no TVs. They're not staring at a phone. What they need to know is the cycles of time. That is their survival is the cycle of times. So when they looked up into the heavens, for example, and they saw, let's say, like Orion in the sky, and Orion is rising in a certain location in the sky, a certain direction in the sky, they say, oh, Orion, this god is now coming up on the horizon. We're going to enter into cooler months, or the water is going to come back. So we have to start preparing our seeds to plant. So they had to kind of map the sky and reflect it on Earth. And this is like the kind of basic understanding of astrology, that, you know, whatever's in the sky above you is kind of reflected on the Earth, because that's how ancient humans basically survived. They had to watch the heavens like a TV show, and they made it like a TV show. So they had stories. Oh, when you see, you know, these stars in the sky, this is the story. And in this story, you get, you have to plant, or you have to harvest, or you have to do this type of work or that type of work. So you would change with the seasons according to the stars and the rising and positions of the sun on the horizon and the moon cycle. So they would map this, and you see very early markings. You know, they found bones and antlers going back 30,000, 40,000 years that have markings on it counting the moon cycle. So they needed to understand these cycles to survive.
But how? Yeah, they needed to for 100%.
Yeah.
I totally get that. To eat, to plant crops, to survive, to last another year, right? To get through a year. All right, okay, makes sense. That sounds pretty simple. When you start exchanging Polaris for Vega every 13,000 years and have an understanding of precession, which is approximately 26,000 years, now we're at a whole nother concept of understanding the tilt of the earth and precession, the importance of Vega, the importance of Polaris, which are important today. But now we're talking about huge amounts of time, right? So 26,000 years, every 13,000 years, 13,000 years from now, from today, Vega is going to replace Polaris.
Yes.
Now, we understand that today. We have computers. We can map this. We can look, but they didn't have this. Well, maybe they did. Right? I don't know. But how do we explain this at 2000 BC? How do we explain that? You know, 1,500 years before Plato, 1,400 years before Herodotus and Solon. I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it boggles my mind, and this is the biggest mystery for me, and that's why I write about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to be so important that they would align their temples to face these certain stars. And exactly what you said, we can date certain temples because of where the stars used to be when they were built. Because, you know, I didn't want to say this because I didn't want to say this, but you know, the Great Pyramid, the descending passage going to the subterranean chamber, is tilted at I'm trying to remember the exact, but it's tilted around 26 degrees. All right. There's only one star in the sky that the light of that star is able to travel down that 26 degree chamber and illuminate the subterranean chamber. There's only one star in the sky. It's Vega. It's Vega.
Ah, here we go. It's Vega again.
Yeah. Vega is the only star that would be in alignment seasonally to light up the subterranean chamber. So that goes back to about 11,000, 12,000 BCE. And that aligns with Graham Hancock and other researchers in that time frame. Is that just a coincidence? Well, we know the pyramid, by carbon dating the pyramid, that it was built at the time of Khufu. But what if that chamber, that subterranean chamber, is much more ancient, much more sacred, and they built the pyramid on top of that? And then they aligned the shafts to the new North Star, which is which would be Thuban in Draco, which is exactly around the time the pyramids would have been built. So these are like timestamps of alignment to stars. And again, like you said, if those chambers were open to the sky, in 14,000 years, that light will come back into that chamber. It'll take 14,000 years to get there.
It's that Canadian weed, man. That Canadian weed. Now, when we come back, I joke. Every time Jason calls me, it's the Jason, I'm throwing you under the bus. Every time Jason calls me with some new idea, that's the first thing out of my mouth. Dude, are you smoking weed? Smoking weed. And I joke about it. I joke up. And listen, I joke about it only because what does it take? It's not the weed.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting here is that Jason is able to just think an alternative thought, having a theory that's triggered by something, a visual, an image, a graphic, whatever, and is able to open up and just go and explore these ideas. Most people don't have that. Like you said earlier, you just want to stay in your lane. And I get that. So many people do. It's a safe place to be. And throughout history, getting out of your lane caused trouble. That's why I asked Jason, were you prepared for what was about to happen when you write about this stuff? It's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, and not make people angry, Jason. And I'm speaking to the audience too. Not make people angry. It's just that when you finally resolve something, for a lot of people, it is Atlantis, and then something comes along that absolutely goes in the opposite direction. Well, people are going to argue and debate this point, and call you a heretic.
Yes. Well, I'll just use Plato's words or Timaeus' words or Critias' words. So it's not coming from me. I'm just showing you what they're saying.
I love driving off of the freeway, man. Well, when it's not in a tour bus. Let's take our break right here. I said it. Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, a very Friday night special. Tonight, Jason Quitt is with us. We're talking about his new book, The Shining Island, and it's Plato's Atlantis. That is the show tonight. Exactly. Jason, stay right there. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with us.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? Go to JimmyChurchRadio.com, become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com.
All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, a special Friday night edition of Fade to Black. Tonight, it is Jason Quitt. We're talking about his new book, The Shining Island. Let's get straight back to it. Jason, book is out now. Where can everybody go and get a copy?
It's available the easiest on Amazon.com. It'll get there within a day or two. Or if you want a signed copy, you can get it from thecrystalsun.com. And you could pick up some Auralite crystals while you're at it.
I love my Auralite. I love my Auralite. From Atlantis. Auralite.
Yes.
It's from Atlantis. Okay. So were you going to say something?
I was going to say, let's get into the story of Atlantis.
Yes. That's See, Jason, astral traveling inside of my head. So now let's get to that part of it. We've got a great setup.
Mm-hmm.
I hate using the word metaphor. It means so many different things, and allegory and fable and so forth. But that's the foundation of where we are at. Now let's move forward. What is the actual story of Atlantis?
The story of Atlantis is the story of the god Poseidon. All right. So basically, in the version, which is written by Plato, it starts with Zeus giving Poseidon the island of Atlantis. All right. So Poseidon is the god of the sea and earthquakes. And now he has control over this continent, which is the size of Asia and Libya combined. So it's a pretty big place. And here, it starts off, he's watching over this island. It's his island in the middle of the waters. And on this island, there is this small mountain. Some translations say it's a hillock. Some say it's a small mountain. But on this mountain, there's two earthborn parents who have a daughter named Cleito. Now, after the parents of Cleito die, Poseidon falls in love with this earthborn human on this mound, this hill. And he falls in love with her, and he has children with her. But first he encloses this hill to protect her. So his first act of this island is to protect this woman, this daughter of man. And he puts three, it's 3 of water and 2 of land around it, just like turns as a lathe. So he creates this kind of island of this mountain coming out of the waters. And he births 5 sets of twins with her. And these 5 sets of twins are male twins. They become the 10 kings of Atlantis. And then they divide the island into 10 sections, and each king gets their place. And the firstborn twin, they name Atlas, and he gets the central hill. He gets the central mound of Atlantis, and Atlantis is named after him. That's why it's called Atlantis, because of Atlas. And that's why you call the sea the Atlantic, because it's named after Atlas. Now, they rule the people. Everything is beautiful. They have fertile lands. They build temples. They erect the orichalcum pillar right in the center of the island on the hill. And that's another story which we'll get into, what an orichalcum pillar is. Again, that's part of the mystery and the keys here. But basically, over many, many generations of interbreeding with demigods and the humans, their bloodline becomes tainted and they become more warlike, and they start to expand outside their allotted territory. And this is where they start to expand into Libya. They start to expand into primeval Athens, the Athenians, and the people that live beyond the gates of Hercules, beyond the pillars of Hercules. So this is the story of Atlantis that we get from the Critias, or get from Critias. So it's a story about the gods, first and foremost. So I'll just ask a simple question. Where have we heard this story from before?
Well, does the story predate Solon at the Temple of Neith?
Absolutely.
So if it predates that, you know what I mean? Do we have two stories happening at the same time? We have the priest for the Temple of Neith, and that history, of course, the Edfu Builder's text, which came later. Okay.
It was influenced by Greek after Plato.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. But what I've always wondered about, especially after reading the book, when you look at Neith and her importance of, you got to remember, man, she gave birth to a couple of very other important Egyptian gods, and Neith was a very important god in Egypt. But that history predates, Solon arrives at 600 BC, 560 BC. He gets to the temple, meets with the priest. The priest has already got this story in play, right? And it's related to Solon. Meanwhile, with Greece and ancient Greece and their story with Zeus and Atlantis, it's two different stories, right? That's and one is older than the other, and that's, you understand where I'm. It seems like there's some truth to it. If you have two independent sources, you know what I mean, telling the same story, it seems like there's an origin, a creation story here that's pretty solid.
I would say that even in the Timaeus, it says that, or Plato writes that the Greeks or the ancient Hellenes were influenced, and they took a lot of their theology from the Egyptians themselves. So they've taken these ancient concepts, these ancient stories of creation, and they remix them. They put their own gods, their own names, and their own stories, but the themes and the motifs are very similar to these ancient stories. And this is why the stories from the Greeks parallel a lot of ancient Egyptian theology. They really did borrow a lot of information from each other. And he admits it right in the Timaeus. He talks about this. Now, when we're saying, okay, so you get these stories where the gods come down and they intermingle with humans. So this is the story of Atlantis. This is the same story. You have Poseidon coming down, taking a daughter of man, having demigod king children. You go to 2,000 to 3,000 years before that, you have the Epic of Gilgamesh. So same story. Gilgamesh takes every woman as his own. Every earthborn woman before he's married, Gilgamesh takes her. You get the Nephilim from the Bible, which is a couple hundred years before Plato as well. You have the Nephilim, who are the giants who take them, have their demigod, who are wiped out by the flood. All of these stories come from that part of the world, and people would have known these stories. It's not like they didn't hear them before. It's not like in a vacuum. The stories exist already for hundreds and hundreds of years. Some of these stories are thousands of years.
Right.
And they keep repeating them over and over again, but they change the characters. All right. So we get this story from Plato, which follows the same motif. The god comes down, has the demigod kings. Now, and then the flood happens. If you go back to the Sumerian kings list, there's 8. Some stories say 8 kings, some stories say 10 kings. And there's 10 demigod kings, just like the Atlantis story. And the original 10 demigod kings of the Sumerian kings list ends at the deluge. All right, so it's exactly the same story thousands of years before the Atlantis story. So we have all of these things in the same area coming together, and Plato is kind of weaving this story together. Now, this gets really interesting because why did Plato, or why did Solon, or why did the priest? See, we don't even know if this is a real story. Plato could have created this from scratch. We don't know this came from Solon. It could be a full creation. And if it was a full creation, why did they name the central figure of the island, the central king, Atlas? Well, Atlas is the Titan who's cursed to uphold the heavens. So basically, Atlas stands there. His whole existence is to hold up the axis Mundi. He is the axis Mundi. And his job is to hold up the heavens and make sure all the planets and stars rotate on its axis. So that's his curse. All right. So I figured out how to share my screen.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Let me see what you got.
So check this out.
And here's while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got it. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Got it.
Okay. So check this out. So you have Atlas, who's basically cursed to hold up the heavens. The first birth twin of Atum on the Ben stone is Shu. And Shu is cursed as well by holding up Nut from Geb. So you have the two central characters, the firstborn twin of creation, have the exact same role, is to be the axis Mundi and hold up the sky, hold up the heavens.
Yeah, and Jason knows about this, but I'm going to explain this to everybody. When you see Nut here, you see her toes all the way over to her fingertips, right? And she is the heavens. She's depicted here without stars. Most of the depictions of her body is blue with white stars on it. So I just want everybody to understand how the Egyptians were doing it. So that's what you're seeing here. The stars, the heavens, are her body.
Yes. And they are like the central pillar, the axis Mundi, the world tree. Okay, they're the center in which all of creation rotates around. So what does that look like? If you looked up at the sky at this exact point, what would that look like in the sky? And this is what you're looking at. So this is the precession of the northern sky, the northern constellations. And basically, like if you look at the top corner here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you look at the top corner, right corner, you see Lyra and Vega.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the age of Virgo, the Virgin, 12,000 BCE. And the sky moves very slowly, 1 degree every 72 years, counterclockwise. So this, in the age of Virgo, this would be the brightest star in the sky. The whole sky would rotate around Vega. And then as it turns, it goes into the constellation Hercules. And it's right in between, literally right in between the legs of Hercules at 9,600 BC in the age of Leo. This is the end of the Younger Dryas period, where there is actual climate changes and flooding on the earth. And this is the date that Plato, or the priest, prescribes the destruction of Atlantis. And then if you continue going this way, you get a star called Tau Hercules, which is around like 7,000 BCE, somewhere around there. And it's very, very faint star, so it wouldn't really be a good marker in the heavens as a North Star, like nothing like Vega or nothing like Thuban. It's not a bright star at all. So basically what happens is you have Vega, let's say at the height of Atlantis, this shining island where all the heavens turn around this star Vega, and then it slowly moves into Hercules. Now, in esoteric traditions, the pillars are outside the temple, and the pillars are known, like let's say the pillars of Solomon, they're like known as the legs that uphold the heavens. So even in esoteric traditions, the pillars are like the legs or the axis mundi that hold up the heavens. So if I can show you, for example, you have Hercules, which could be an allegory for the Athenians fighting the Atlanteans, and Atlantis loses. They sink under the horizon, under the waters. Hercules, the Athenians, are victorious in the battle against the Atlanteans, but almost immediately after, there's an earthquake and they fall into the earth, is what it says in the book. Now, what's interesting is when the pole star reaches Tau Hercules in the sky, the constellation Hercules basically turns on this knee point of this leg, as it looks like Hercules is basically falling into a hole in the sky. Now, in the 12 labors of Hercules, which remember, this is a very famous mythology, which is around during the time of Plato. Everybody knew the 12 labors back then. That one of the 12 labors was that Hercules had to go and get this apple of immortality from the island of Hesperides. And Atlas says he can get it for him under one condition, basically, is he wants to give Hercules the axis mundi. He wants to give him the vault of heaven. So he asks Hercules, can you hold the vault of heaven for me, and I'll go get this secret apple of immortality for you. But Atlas was going to trick him and say, you know what, I'm just going to let Hercules hold the axis mundi from now on. All right. So here it's basically telling you this story of this kind of handing over from Atlas, this handing over from the axis mundi to Hercules. And if you put this up to the sky, this is what I'm talking about. It's this handing over of the North Star. So it's going from Lyra to from Vega, and it's moving this kind of axis mundi over to Hercules. All right. So you see how there's this kind of connection between these stories and what you're seeing in the heavens. So is that clear?
Yeah, very clear.
Okay. So you have to imagine Vega as the North Star 14,000 years ago. And here is the constellation Lyra. Now, if you trace the orbits around Vega, it looks almost identical to the layout given by Critias of the layout of Atlantis. But again, what we're talking about is the northern sky. Now, I'm going to stop sharing here because I really want to talk about this creation story of the mound and the Ben, because it goes directly into the understanding of the building of Atlantis. All right. Now, so let me say the story again, because it reflects ancient Egyptian cosmology. You have the central hill that is now there is water surrounding the central hill. This is the same imagery, the same motif as the Ben stone rising out of the waters of Nun. And this is the place where Aten settles and has his children. Okay, so it's the same story. You have Clito on the mound surrounded by water, and this is the place of the creation of the kings. So it follows the exact same theme of these stories.
Now, let me jump in.
Yes.
I've always been interested in where the Ben stone rose up. Did it rise up out of the Nile, or was it out of the Mediterranean? And the reason I struggle with this, because we have Atlantis and we have, the possibility of the Pillars of Hercules and Atlantis being out there. There's been a lot of speculation of Atlantis being near Greece, in the Mediterranean proper. But here's the problem with that for me. The Egyptians were horrible sailors. Okay, they didn't go out. They were afraid of the Mediterranean. They had nicknames for the Mediterranean. Sailing up and down the Nile was easy because it flowed in one direction and the winds were in the opposite direction. So if you ever see a drawing of a boat on the Nile, you knew if it was going up the Nile or down the Nile, if the sails were up or down. Okay? If you're going with the current, sails are down, you're just pointing. You don't have to be a sailor. You just got to point your boat and keep it in the middle of the Nile, right? And if you're going in the opposite direction, you need to go back down to Thebes, right, to Luxor. You're going to raise your sails and you're going to go against the current, but you have the wind at your back. But going out to the Mediterranean, no. The Egyptians historically were horrible sailors. Now, did they do it? Yeah, they did, and they took their chances. So where did the Ben rise up out of the water? Where do you think this happened, Jason?
Well, I don't want to, there's nothing I can say because I don't know. But what I will say is that go back to the theology and the story itself. Okay, so the story of creation is everything is water, this dark ocean. And from this water, this land emerges, this mound, and from that creation. Now, if you go to Egypt right now and you look at a block of limestone, for example, you'll see sea life in it. If you go into the desert, you're going to see sea life. You're going to see whale bones in the desert. All right. How did these things get here? So if they're living in this location, they're not stupid. They're cutting blocks. They live in this location. They see ancient sea life, fossils, skeletons on the land, in the stone, in their building material. And they're raising the Ben stone. As you said from before, it's like they're building this Ben stone up. Now, if you map it to the story or the cosmology of the myth or the creation story itself, the whole point is Atom's light or Ra's light illuminates the Ben stone. Okay, and that gives creation. That is the spark of creation. And who is Ra? Who is Atom? It's the sun. All right, so you have to look at this. You have the pyramid, and you have the Ben stone, the capstone at the top of the pyramid. You have the Ben stone on top of the obelisk. And you even have the orichalcum pillar in the middle of Atlantis, okay? Same thing. When the sun rises or sets, okay, the earth is bathed in shadow because of the curve of the earth. The earth is bathed in shadow. Right when the first light comes off the horizon, the whole pyramid is in shadows except the capstone. Okay, the capstone illuminates with the sun's light while everything else is in shadow. It's that first spark of illumination. So the building structure itself, the rising of the Ben stone, literally maps the story of the sun and the rays illuminating that first light. All right, so you can say that it's a giant sundial for morning and night. You'll see that.
Okay, so let's go back. So what you're suggesting here is that if not knowing where the Ben first arose and rose out of the water, if we're talking about when the Sahara was an ocean, now we're pushing back time. I mean, we're going way back, right? And that throws another, these ideas are solid, but what we do know is whale bones skeletons have been found deep in the Sahara Desert. You can visit them today. You can go and see them.
Mhm.
They're there. There's boats out there too, as well. There's a lot of crazy stuff. So, but that's pushing back the dates far. Now, if we go back, let's go back to the Temple of Neith for a second.
Sure.
And Solon. If we look at Nut, who was the heavens,
Yeah.
her representation is all over Egypt, right? It's in tombs. It's in the Valley of the Kings. It's at different temple sites. It's all over Egypt. That is nothing new. Do you think that Plato created Atlas from the imagery of Nut, which goes back a couple of thousand years before Plato?
I believe that it is directly taken from it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind that Atlas's role mirrors exactly what happens to Shu and Tefnut and Nut and Geb, because here's the story. The story is that before time, Nut and Geb were sleeping together. All right, so you have the heaven and the earth together as one, and they're twins. They're brothers and sisters.
And there's 4 of them: earth, fire, water, air. Right? I think isn't that?
Yes,
that's right.
But so now you have the earth and the sky, which is Nut and Geb together, the brother and sister, and one day they have intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
And they create the creator gods. So this is where you get Osiris, you get Set, Nephesis, Isis. This is where you get the creator gods. And again, they're like twins. They're together. So Atum or Ra gets so angry with them and says, "You can't have creation. You can't do creation. So Shu, you're cursed now. You have to stand in between your daughter and your son. You have to hold Nut above the earth so that they can never come back together and create new gods." All right. So he is forced for his whole life to stand there and hold up the heavens. And it's the same story in the with Zeus, where basically Atlas is cursed, and he literally has to hold the Axis Mundi, hold the heavens for eternity, which is not a fun task. He's very tired. He's trying to figure out ways of not doing this. So
can you definitively say that at this point, any researchers getting on boats sailing around the world looking for Atlantis are spinning their wheels?
I personally don't think it's an actual location on Earth. I think it's an allegory of the heavens. And this, I can show you a map, basically. Because remember, you have the Atlantis story within the corpus of the Timaeus. And the Timaeus has all this cosmology, all this astrology. It talks about the creation of the universe from the demiurge, about benevolent demiurge. And he talks about how the universe basically has these circles. Everything is the image of the creator, and the image of the creator is circles within circles within circles. And you have there's 8 circles. You have the outer circle, which really doesn't move too much, which is the stars, the fixed stars. And then you have the 7 circuits, which is the Platonic order of Earth, Moon, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn. It's this order, and it says it plain and simply in the Timaeus that this is the order, and the whole structure is these circles within circles. It even gives the divisions and harmonics of these circles, 2 of 3, all these ratios, and it gives you the ratios of the Pythagorean semitones. So it's heavily influenced by Pythagoras and the musical scale. Timaeus talks about how this scale, these ratios, are basically the harmonies of the universe and the structure of everything. is based on these ratios. It's how the planets move in their directions, forward, backwards. And when you take, let me see if I can show this to you, because I could just talk about this stuff, but these are my words. I want you to see their words. All right, so here's their words. Let me share the screen. Oh, no, not that. No, sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So I don't know if you can see this. All right, so this is the structure of Atlantis. So this is the geometric structure that's given in the Critias of the exact layout of Atlantis. So these are the 3 of water, 2 of land outside the central hill. Here's the plain, which is about 100 strata, 60,000 feet in length. And this is from the Timaeus. He, the demiurge, wrought it, the universe into a round in the shape of a sphere, equidistant in all directions, from the center to the extremities, which of all shapes is the most perfect and the most self-similar. And on the outside roundabout, it was all made smooth with great exactness. He spun it round uniformly in the same spot and within itself, and made it move, revolving in a circle. He made the universe a circle moving in a circle. But then he goes on in the next line to say, but the inner motion he divided in 6 places, and he made 7 unequal circles. Well, that's the exact layout of Atlantis that Critias talks about. So you have Timaeus talking about the structure of the universe and the world's soul. And then right after, you have Critias describing the layout of Atlantis. And as you take the description and lay it on top of the Atlantis geometry, it's the exact same structure.
Where do we go from here? Let's take the leap and say that you are correct, right?
Okay,
That
yes.
well, not correct. Nobody's ever correct, but that right. you are figuring out that Atlantis, Plato's version, and also the ancient Egypt version of Atlantis, that this was all allegory, that this was an Aesop fable, to be taught lessons that we can learn from about becoming a society that gets ahead of our skis, right? Okay, that's basically it in a nutshell. Let's say that that's the case. Well, where do we go from here? How do we, is that a smooth transition where we can just accept that this is a story that we need to draw lessons from and learn from for our own existence and the future of us here on Earth? Is it really that simple? There's it. When you know what I mean? When dogma just gets repeated, it becomes truth. So how do you peel people away from the dogma of Atlantis?
Well, I would just say that this is multi-layered, because there is moral, philosophical themes in this story.
Deep.
All right? So deep. So there is all this stuff. There is a talk of the cosmology of cycles of time. And catastrophe, like world-ending floods by water and fire. So there is this reality that there is cycles of time that we go through cataclysms, and we've survived them before. It tells you in the Timaeus and also the Critias that the survivors, basically, they survive by climbing mountains, and they don't care about history. They don't care about anything. They only care about survival. So they lose their memories, they lose their traditions, they lose their history, because all they can do is survive on these mountains until the floods recede. So this is what is presented to us in these works, which I think is very real. The Egyptian priest said it best, is that it will come again. 100%, the world will face these things again. And again, we're going to be climbing the mountains and trying to survive. We're going to forget about all these things. But there are going to be certain people, like record keepers, that are going to remember the ancient stories, pass through the myths of the gods and the cycles of time. And that's how these things survive. And that's why Plato's work has survived, because it's set up in that language. It's very easy. And again, you know, I don't want to say there's ignorance to this, but there's too many variations of this story. And if you just go back to the source and reread it, you'll see that most of the things that we're kind of told about Atlantis that's in the mainstream has nothing to do with the original work at all.
No, it's scientific knowledge, astronomical knowledge, and history preserved in myth and written into stone. Right. Yes. Ultimately, that's what's going on. Combining the myth with the scientific knowledge database.
That's right. And this is why I love talking about Egypt so much, because for me, the monuments are the story, and the mythology or the creation story is reflected in the monuments themselves. So it is recorded in stone so perfectly that, you know, thank God we have all this information. We have these sites preserved.
Here's another incredible part about all of this. The Narmer palette.
Oh, yes.
Okay. I'm just going to say the Narmer palette. And for those of you listening that don't know what we're talking about after the show tonight, write it down, Narmer palette, and go down that friggin' rabbit hole. But I will say this about the Narmer palette. It is dated to 3200 BC and could potentially be older. 3200 BC, before Sumerian writing. Before at 3200 BC, there's a couple of critical things on that palette that absolutely solidifies everything that Jason is saying. On that palette, where we see Egyptian hieroglyphs, the ancient text is clearly there. So they had a fully developed system of writing already at 3200 BC. So the Narmer palette wasn't the first, but it's 3200 years old. Why do we know? It says Narmer, right? On the palette in hieroglyphs at 3200 BC. The next critical thing that is there is Narmer's image. He's smiting the enemy, right? And he's in that famous pose, right? He's holding a club, right? He's got a club. He's got dude by the hair, and he's getting ready to whack him in the skull. That image from 3200 BC continued for the next 3,200 years. Every pharaoh. So when we look at the Narmer palette at 3,200 BC, clearly everything was already established in Egypt. The style of art that was going to exist, Jason, for the next 3,000 years. The hieroglyphs, the writing, the storytelling, the imagery is all on the Narmer palette. The Narmer palette is the oldest thing that we have found, but it clearly establishes a civilization that was upright and functional. Absolutely. At 3,200 BC. Greece wasn't going to happen for another 2,000 years. That's what solidifies your book and everything that you have presented tonight.
Yes. And again, it's like we have this history available to us, but a lot of it is lost, but we have the symbols of it. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find these creation myths or these stories from ancient cultures and see how they relate to this iconography, these hieroglyphs, and what it shows. And you can start to see that there is this kind of fundamental story that follows these cultures going back thousands of years. And when you strip it all away, it goes right back to what the Egyptian priest said to Solon, is that these stories of the gods are myths, but the underlying thing is the movement of the heavens around the earth. And once you understand these cycles, then you understand the cataclysm cycles, and they've marked them in the sky with these gods and characters of Hercules. That's why Hercules is so important in Hellenistic mythology, because I think that something drastic happened on the earth when it entered into the pillars of Hercules in the sky. Something drastic happened. And we have the scientific proof of the end of the Younger Dryas period, where we know that huge things happened during that time frame, die-off of animals, fluctuations of climate, flooding, all these terrible things. So again, how does our ancestors relay that information through myth unless it's about the gods and the sky?
Well, and at the same time, it's such a great point, Jason, that the flood, the deluge, the Younger Dryas, was it cosmic? Was it something else? Was it natural? We don't know these things, but we know that the event itself happened. There was a civilization prior to the Younger Dryas, and the survivors of the Younger Dryas are what went out and shared their knowledge and kept civilization moving forward. And that is the story of Atlantis. It's mythological. And is that a proper way of framing not only this show tonight, but the book?
Yes. And I'll just add that there was a civilization, there was a community, at least a population, that built monumental monuments at that exact time of Atlantis, at the exact time of the destruction of Atlantis. And that is Göbekli Tepe.
Yep, that's right. And there's one other spin. I want to throw this out there. I think you and I talked about this a few months ago, but I'm just going to throw this out there. When we look at ancient Egypt mythology with the gods, there's one critical component that gets overlooked by many researchers and stuff. It'd be a great movie, and that is Osiris. And what went down. We're talking about a body that was cut apart, taken to Babylon, where the king of Babylon put him in one of the pillars of his new palace that he was building.
Yeah.
Right. So
Babylos.
Isis goes, right. And while all of that was going on, Osiris, while he was missing, Set goes out and teaches the world about how to establish a civilization correctly. And again, this happens, if we follow the timeline, around the time of the deluge, about the time of the end of the Younger Dryas. And that story is firmly there in the Egyptian creation myth, but it gets ignored by not only Egyptologists, but the rest of the historians out there. But that's another part. When we talk about Enki and we talk about the Sumerian texts and Gilgamesh, well, that story too also exists with Egypt, and how after the Younger Dryas and the floods happened, that it was Egypt that wanted to go out and make sure that the world could continue to be educated so that this knowledge wasn't lost. I find that fascinating, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Well, we could talk about it.
But isn't it interesting how it ties in not only with the timeline, but these same stories that other civilizations around the world talk about. And was it Egypt that was teaching everybody? Was it Atlantis, the survivors, the ancient civilizations before that? What do you think? What do you think? Does it all tie together? Or is it just all the same story?
I think there's wisdom in all of it, and it goes back to the cycles, and this is why you see it all over the place. And if you want to talk about that story of Isis and Osiris, he's in a chest. He gets put in a chest, goes down the Nile. He gets taken into a tree. They weld
it shut. It's made of, I think they said it was made of lead.
Yeah,
if I'm correct. And they throw it in the Nile. It floats down, gets out of the Mediterranean, floats across to Babylon, where it rolls up on a beach, right?
Yes, and the tree kind of overtakes it, and it's a great big tree, tamarack tree. And the king of Babylos takes it to build the pillar for his temple. So again, you get this story of the pillar, all right? And what is Osiris known for is the Jed pillar.
That's right.
So you have the pillar in the temple. Babylos is where we get the word Bible, by the way. So, and then, Isis takes him out, Set realizes the body's been found, cuts him up into 14 pieces. She then collects them all. I'm going really fast, but she collects them all, reassembles him, resurrects him, gets a child, which is Horus. So now he's in the underworld, king of the underworld. Horus is now the main character. But here's the very interesting part about this whole thing. You get the rising of Osiris. So this is an annual thing with the floods. Osiris rises, the Jed pillar rises. The pillar, again, is the Axis Mundi. It's the same story in Atlantis. You have the orichalcum pillar directly in the center. Orichalcum, Oris means mountain, calcum means bronze. Okay, so this is a sacred metal of the god. And again, you're getting into this mound type of theology or allegory of the setting and rising sun is the orichalcum. It's the red light of this sacred metal. And this is in the center of Atlantis. Now, this pillar that gets risen in Egypt, that we call the Jed pillar, which is the spine of Osiris, this is the Axis Mundi being risen. And in the pyramid text, it talks about the legs and arms of Atum, which is the pillars, the 4 pillars of the children of Horus, or the children of Atum. And they stand in the cardinal directions as pillars, 4 pillars that hold up the heavens. And Osiris is the central pillar. All right.
I said Set went around the world. It was Horus that went around the world, while Isis went back to Babylos and got Osiris. While that was going on, which took, I think they said took about 20 years. Isis is gone doing this. It was Horus that went around and taught the world.
And so during this, the whole point of this is that these stories have motifs and themes of them that create the symbology that we know today. So I was just saying that you have the Jed pillar, which is kind of a pillar with 4 tiers or 4 tops to it. You have the 4 pillars of the cardinal directions, and when they move together, it forms the symbology of the Jed pillar, which is the rising and holding of the Axis Mundi, which is Atlas again, which is the central mound and mountain, the place of the temple of Poseidon. All of these themes, they're the exact same story, but told in different populations over different spans of time. And once we understand these ancient creation myths and see them as themes of the cycles of time and how they viewed creation of the universe, we start to understand that there's this deeper knowledge, this deeper cosmology, very deep knowledge that is hidden within these stories that most people, they can't see it until they're kind of taught or initiated into this esoteric field of astrology, cosmology, etymology, things like this.
And when you look really deeply into ancient Egypt, as I have and you have, of course, I'm speaking to the audience right now. When you look at this, there was an overall frame of things. It's called Maat, right? Okay, M-A-A-T. Again, everybody write this down. Go and check it out. But extending out of that, there's a lot of researchers and Egyptologists that have their own interpretations of what Maat is. But I think overall, everything overlaps, which is Egypt is fucking perfect, and we're not going to mess it up. That's overall, right? That's the thing, the Maat, right? This is it. We are perfect. You don't want to die outside of the borders of Egypt because you're dying in a land that sucks. Egypt is where it's at. Now, this was the philosophy of Egypt, that we have got it together here and everything else is just not as cool. It's not as great. That's why they didn't go and expand into Libya or just conquer, and take over. No. Because that land over there, it's shit. Egypt is where it's at. And we're not going to upset any of that. The Maat must exist. And that exists inside of the borders of Egypt. It's a crazy concept. And it lasted for 3,000 years. It worked. And in a lot of ways, Egypt was very, 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 very conservative. I know that sounds crazy, but they just didn't go off book. They didn't go off book. Akhenaten went off book for 17 years, right? He went off book, but as soon as that was over, they went back onto book.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And they just stayed right there. They had their polytheism. They had all the gods that they needed. They didn't fight over their own gods. There was no disagreements. The Nile came in every year. There was plenty of food for everybody. They needed some more money. They went and invaded something and took some gold and came back. And it just went on for 3,000 years, this divine Maat of existence, this very conservative way of living. It's a fascinating story, isn't it?
It is. And even Herodotus, when he lived there, he wrote basically saying that, don't you know that Egypt is the image of the heavens? And it's and that everything that's laid out, from the pyramids to the temples, they're aligned to these sacred places, or sacred times, or sacred cycles, and sacred gods and goddesses. And each temple is an initiation of those nature elements, the stars, the cycles, the elements. And that's why it was so perfect. It was like each temple was a learning center, a university, let's say, for the priests.
That's right.
And that's what kept the society in sync over all those thousands of years, because the divine intelligence of how it was set up from the start, or evolved into that. But once it connected to the cycles of the stars, the gods, the elements, the seasons, once it figured all that out, it's like, what else does your society need?
No, they didn't need anything, because the religious concepts that were laid out, and that you had a pharaoh that was a god, right? So the pharaoh's the god. Whatever the pharaoh says, you did, right? Okay. But what aligned with all of that? Every day was perfect. Not a cloud in the sky, right? No tornadoes, no hurricanes, no earth, nothing. Every day was just perfect. And it allowed them to develop as a society and to have thoughts and to be creative, because they weren't interrupted with other things. For 3,000 years, man. Think about that. And so the Maat made sense, the religion made sense, the temples made sense, the pharaohs made sense, and Maat made sense, and nobody messed with it. Nobody messed with it.
And I would say some of the best of the knowledge was transferred and kept into ancient religions, into the Greeks, into the Romans, into Judaism, Christianity. Like it all came from Egypt. It all came out of Egypt. So we have that kind of foundation, and the Western world itself is based off of these ideals and these stories that we're discussing tonight.
Yeah, completely. And that was one of the other things. The Romans kind of screwed things up, but that's another story for another time. But when Alexander the Great showed up, he was rescuing Egypt. And he told me, he said, man, I respect everything that you guys have got going on here. So let's continue with the old ways. I want to learn. I would like to become a pharaoh, but I need to learn and respect what's going on here. Because he was completely impressed with their existence and how long not only Egypt was around, but the established way of life and the Mott. Yeah, Rome. That's another story for another time. When the Persians came in and invaded Egypt, they invaded it because it was a perfect land. It was a perfect society, and they wanted part of it. It was Alexander that came in and rescued the Egyptians from the Persians. And he eventually did become pharaoh. And
you have incredible temples built after that with the Greek influence, but they wanted to maintain the history and the great knowledge of Egypt.
Dendera is an example of that.
Exactly. So you have these amazing temples dedicated to the gods and the heavens and all these ancient stories and creation myths to preserve them. So they did so much to preserve the Egyptian history and the Egyptian stories.
Wasn't the temple, the Isis Philae, wasn't that Greek?
Yeah, of course that was.
Yeah, that was Greek.
Yeah.
Amazing site, by the way. But that was Greek. Dendera, everybody talks about Dendera. It's one of my favorite places. It's Greek.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Egyptian, but it was built in the Ptolemaic period.
So, we kind of get this kind of crossed wires stuff where it's like they can go to the Temple of Hathor, they can go to the Edfu texts, and they can say, oh, see, they're talking about these themes of these cataclysms and, the flood and all these things. But that was written after Plato. Before that, you don't have those hieroglyphs, you don't have those stories. So it's kind of like a new thing, an added thing coming into later periods. So people will come and they'll look at these things and say, oh, look, it's in the Egyptian temples. They say, yeah, but this was built by the Greeks.
Yeah. But and we're out of time. What a great show, Jason. But if you go and you look at the pyramid text and you look at the other stuff that is out there, referencing all the way back to Isis and Osiris and Horus and everything, that is a couple of thousand years before
correct
Greece was even a thought.
Yes.
Right.
That's
how old Egypt is.
Yeah.
People don't understand. I try to say this as much as I can. If we go with the Orthodox historical record, all right, and you go to 3000 BC, Egypt is established at that point. Okay, that's fine. Greece was a 2,000-year-old distant dream. Rome was mud huts. You need to understand the concept of how old Egypt truly is. And again, I'll point to the Narmer palette. The Narmer palette is beautiful, complete, and established at 3200 BC. So there you go. Ken Priest, 4 pipes for tonight. Ken, I love you, brother. I hope you're doing good. I'll give you a call over the weekend, Ken. Thank you for the $5, brother. Jason, you are the absolute very best, my brother. Give my best to Monica. Enjoy your weekend. There's the book right there, The Shining Island. Head over to Amazon and get it. And again, it's just another thing where let's just keep this stuff going into the middle of the table. Let's see what we got, and let's figure out how to move forward. Jason, you're a big part of that. Thank you for being a part of my world, man. All right. Enjoy your weekend. Jason Quitt. Thank you, Jason. I'll call you tomorrow, brother. All good?
Yo,
all good.
All good. Good night.
I'll talk to you. Thank you, Jason. There you go. A very special Friday night edition of Fade to Black. Thank you for everybody that took the time to be here. Thank you, of course, Jason Quitt. Another great conversation. Head over to thecrystalsun.com. Links for that are below. Head over to Amazon. Look up Jason Quitt. The book is The Shining Island. With that, I'm going to go. I'm watching Hawk right now. Yeah, on Netflix. If you don't know what it is, go check it out. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. But for now, all I've got is Go Backly Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Backly Tappy.